So hello and welcome to another Project Cars video at Bannochbrae. We'll be driving the Group 5 BMW 320 Turbo. I'll be driving around the circuit showing you a flat out lap. We'll look over the car setup and how it's been adjusted. I'll also take a slower drive around the circuit to explain a few of the entries to some of the corners and exits, and you'll see where I've went wrong myself during filming. So without further ado, let's get cracking. So before we get started on the flat out lap, I just thought I'd show you this first turn, how you think you might get it right, just looking up at the rear view mirror and see the sort of lead that I've made. And as soon as we start the next lap, you'll see just how much further ahead I could have actually been. So enjoy the lap guys, and I'll leave you to enjoy this one, and I'll join you shortly. So with that fast lap done, let's take a little bit of a slower drive around, and obviously the lap's going to start here. We're going to try and get nicely on the power, and I am using a manual gear shifter here. I'm not using the pedals. I just use the pedals to shift down, and then I'm using a manual shifter to shift up, so you can see the inputs that I'm making through the pedals. I thought I'd leave that on the display. And just as we come over the crest of that hill there, you're going to take a tiny sort of lift. I'm not even sure if I dabbed the brake, but you're going to sort of want to scrub the grass as you come through there. You've almost got full lock on using the setup that I've got, and here's how not to do it. And it just sort of runs a little bit wide and it sort of drags you off as soon as you hit that barrier. So here we're just hitting the as soon as you see that slow sign, the first slow sign, I'd start braking. You want to be braking nice and early really to be able to hug this inside where there's a lot more grip. And then you just flatten the power. The car's sort of twisted around as it hits like the second turbo power band. And then again, we're going to be sort of trying to scrub a little bit of grass on the inside here, almost at full lock, and it feels like the car's really understeering. Just touching the grass on the outside there, and then coming in. Don't take too much like that, or else it can look a lot worse, as you can see here. So as we carry on across the bridge here, then we're flat out in third gear, And just as we see that first slow sign, it's the second one just before it that we're going to start slowing down. And it's a really, really tough one. You're just trying to stay on that inside, and it's so hard to get the power down and keep it down through that section. As you can see here, braking too late, and you just run too deep into the corner. and you can see in the rear view mirror how much of my lead just ekes away. Flat out through here, just as we come over the rise of the hill, we're going to be dropping into 4th gear, and then another hard section really to nail just at that lamppost back there. We're going to be braking hard and really sort of trying to throw the car in nice and early so we can get on the power. As you can see here, I'm just on the power a little bit too early, and this car starts to just run wide, and again it just drags you off into the side. So flat out again, up, and as we go over the hill we're going to be into 4th gear, and then coming down, just watching for the lamppost on the right hand side there as we brake, drop down into 3rd, and then back on the power through here. And then as we're coming into this section, just as we hit that lamppost just there, braking nice and hard and taking a nice early line into the corner, and then just trying to get on that power as soon as we can. As you can see, I was in nice and early, but the car's squirming all over the place, and then it just all goes wrong really quickly. So as you can see from the replay, you just need to be really careful feathering in that throttle, try and get it nice and straight. So as we're coming on up through here, just take a nice clean line through there. You can pick up a penalty sometimes, so just be careful not to take too much curb. Up into 3rd gear, maximum power through this section, just fighting with the wheel trying to get through that corner, and then hard, flat on the accelerator. And then just as we come over the rise of the hill, dropping down into 2nd gear, try and hug this left hand side. Easy to do at slow speeds, but very hard in high speeds. So flat out through here, into 3rd, into 4th, coming down the hill. Going to take a nice dab of the brake, dropping into 3rd at the bottom of the hill to come over this rise. Try and keep nice and clean through there, as I didn't do on my fastest lap. And then coming through here, just blipping and squeezing the throttle where you can without taking too much air. And then nice and steady on the brake through here, into 2nd gear. And just being really tentative to get back on the power so you can get full traction out of that corner, and then flat out down the start finish straight all the way across the line. So with the drive round completed, we'll take a little look at the setup. Usually I don't run with all the display on the screen. I find it quite off-putting. And if you enjoy looking at the field of view, I've sort of tried to sit myself a little bit higher so that I can see the corner of the bonnet, which gives me a better view as to where the edges of the cars are, and just allows me to pick my line through the corner much better. And you can see that on one of my previous videos, which I'll link in the description above. So then, moving on to the setup, quite a lot to look at. And we'll make a start with the tyres. Obviously we're going to be using the soft tyre. Looking at the temperature, track temperature is 71 Fahrenheit. Usually want to be using the softs anywhere under 100. And using the lower tyre pressures on the front, just to try and aid with front end grip really. And this car just suffers so much with understeer. It's just a question of really lowering the front end to aid with the front end understeer. Obviously the brake pressure is going to be something that you're going to decide yourself depending on how you've got your pedal set up. And the brake balance, obviously you can see if you bring it forward, the car is probably going to tend to understeer, and then to the rear it's going to start, as you're braking hard, the back end might come out. So this is like a balancing act. The brake ducts are set just to allow some air to the brake ducts, and the rear downforce is set it's quite low just to try and aid in that front end understeer, with getting a little bit of traction on the rear to help through the corners. Looking at the caster, if you try and increase the caster just one notch, it really does add quite a lot of weight to the wheel and makes it almost feel a little bit less responsive. So I keep the caster at 5.7. The front camber angles maxed out, and the ride height I've set slightly higher than it would go. I think it goes to 55 because it feels like it just bottoms out for in a few of the corners under heavy braking. The camera angles at the rear set to 1.6 just to aid in corner grip and acceleration out of the corners, and obviously the ride heights to try and sort of give a lot of rake on the car to get the front area working as best as possible. And the rear spring rate's just set a little bit softer than the front spring rate really, just to again try and aid that front end understeer. The steering ratio is going to be something you'll decide yourself depending on what sort of wheel you're using. I tend to use the McLaren wheel, so I want quite a short steering ratio. And the toe in is just to get a little bit more response turning in. And again, the anti-roll bar is set quite low. Obviously, we've got this understeer effect as we turn into the corners, and having a softer front end anti-roll bar will just try and assist through those mid corners, just to try and reduce some of that understeer, and the toe angle at the rears just to try and get the car in a nice straight line under acceleration. The bump stops I've raised to 5mm just to try and stop the car bottoming out, and the slow bump and rebound etc. have just been adjusted a tiny bit really, just to try and aid through some of the bumpy sections. The boost pressure's on max, the air restrictors are open, and the radiators close as much as possible, and we're going to try and get that engine braking down as low as we can. Obviously the radiator, it does cause a problem towards the end of the lap, and you certainly couldn't do 2 laps with it closed. Moving to the final drive ratio, I've set this quite high really. We're not going to be using 5th gear at all. 2nd gear is eked out a little bit as well to try and get maximum traction out of some of the corners, and obviously to aid in not changing up into 3rd gear on one of the corners, just to try and run a really nice long 2nd gear. And 4th gear is just maxed out a little bit further so that we didn't have to actually go into 5th gear down the fast start finish straight. And the traction control and ABS aren't in use because it doesn't have them on this car. Going to the preload, there's only the power ramp that I've adjusted I think on this setup, just to try and aid in some of the acceleration out of the corners. If you are struggling at getting the power down out of the corners and it's oversteering too much, I'd suggest trying to increase your power ramp. And that's the setup guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and just moving on to the final replay for those guys that enjoy the replays. So if you've enjoyed what you see, please take a minute just to hit that subscribe button that'll pop up in the left hand corner, and just keep coming back. You never know what you might miss. Until next time, ciao for now.